most people assume that government is going to be, that money is going to be issued by a government. Nowadays, that's usually paper money. At various times in the past, it's been paper money backed by gold or silver, or it's been actual gold coins or silver coins. And what I want to argue is that you want to think about the incentives of the issuing body. That is to say, how is it in their interest to act? And there are at least a couple of problems with a money issued by a government, which that government can freely change, such as a fiat currency, which is what we're used to, or a fractional reserve currency if the government can control the reserve requirement. And that is that if the government expands the money supply, it gets three effects, three effects that are potentially valuable to it. One of them is it gets some extra money to spend without visible taxes. The second one is that it will have a temporary effect on things like unemployment, because if people expect prices to be stable and you start printing more money, demand for labor goes up. Workers do not insist on higher wages because they don't realize that the prices are going to go up in the future, and so the unemployment rate drops. And that's a very, very brief sketch of sort of a standard monetarist account of business cycles and such. So the government can get often temporary benefits by an unexpected inflation. And third, an unexpected inflation benefits debtors at the expense of creditors, because it means that the $1,000 I owe you is no longer worth $1,000 after another year or two. Governments are often debtors. Sometimes governments are supported by voting blocs that are debtors, sometimes by creditors. So that means the government has an incentive sometimes to inflate. And if you look at government fiat monies, they don't have a very good record. That the US hasn't done horribly by historical standards, and certainly some other countries have done much worse. And the question is, how can you do better? And the answer, I think, is to have privately issued money by competing private banks. And this sounds sort of like a radical idea, but in fact, it's the way the monetary system of Scotland was working when Adam Smith was writing in the 18th century, had been working for quite a long time. And the basic system, this is a private fractional reserve system, and it's one in which a bank issues paper money. It guarantees that it will redeem the paper money in something valuable, typically in the Scottish case in silver, on demand. It issues typically a good deal more money than it actually holds silver, but that's because it has other assets. Because when it issues money, it buys stuff, and there may well be investors who set up the bank in the first place. And so if lots of people decide they want their silver, the first 10,000 come in and they get silver coins. They get them by handing in paper money. The bank then uses its other assets to buy more silver coins, maybe to buy back the silver coins that they just handed over, or other ones. Those silver coins they can continue as long as the bank's assets are like greater than its liabilities. It can redeem all of it, even though the actual silver coins it has are many fewer than the paper that it's issued. Now, there were a couple of ways in which the Scottish banks backstopped this system, as it were. One of them was that it might take time to get all that additional silver was always demanded. And so the banknote sometimes had what was called the option clause, which said the bank retains the option of delaying its redemption of the money by 6 months or a year, in exchange for which we will give you some preset, an extra 5% or whatever it was of the money we owe you. And the other thing they did, because one of the risks in this system is, suppose the bank holds assets, but some of those assets turn out not to be worth anything. They make mistakes. They buy land, which then turns out to be worthless, or their treasurer runs away with a bunch of money, or something else happens. So you could imagine a situation where the bank's assets become less than its liability. And that's a worry if you have paper money and you want it to be redeemed. So what the Scottish banks typically did was that the banks were set up as unlimited liability partnerships. And one of the partners was an independently wealthy individual, likely in that society, an aristocratic landowner. And his assets were large enough so that even if the bank ran out of money, everybody knew that he could, at cost to himself, replace them. So you could imagine in our modern society, the equivalent of that would be to have Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, or maybe Microsoft itself or Apple, as one partner agreeing to unlimited liability for the bank's debts. Then the question is, what are the incentives of that bank? And the answer is that if the bank issues too much money, enough money so that either people are worried it can't redeem it, or just that the amount of money it issues is such that the price of things goes up. In particular, the price of silver goes up. It now pays to take your bill that's redeemable for an ounce of silver, since an ounce of silver is now worth more than the face value of that bill. So you bring it in to get the silver, at which point, as Adam Smith points out, the bank, having issued too much money, has to spend time and effort redeeming money, printing more paper, redeeming money, printing more paper. That gets nothing out of that. So therefore, it's in the interest of the bank to maintain the value of its money, which it does, A, by being willing to redeem, and B, by not issuing more than the market will bear. And you can do that with multiple banks. Now, it is convenient, certainly would have been convenient in the past, if the multiple banks all use the same definition for their money, so that all of them make their pound note be some amount of silver, probably less than a pound of silver in the 18th century, whatever it is. Nowadays, that's less essential. I like to say that the European countries got a common money just as it became unnecessary, because converting between currencies is arithmetic, and computers do arithmetic fast and cheap. So that I can go to Europe, put a Visa card in a machine in London, and draw British pounds out of a US dollar account. The paperwork is all handled in the background by the computers. So it's less essential that all of the money be in the same units than it used to be, but it's still convenient. So that would be what I would basically advocate. Now, if you're thinking about the ideal system, you probably don't want to use either silver or gold, because silver or gold both have the weakness that their price can be, their real price, what they can exchange for, can be changed by external circumstances. So if you have, as you had in the late 19th century, you had a fairly limited output of gold, economies were growing, more countries were going on the gold standard, and the result was that prices were going down. Gold was becoming more valuable. Well, that's sort of inconvenient if you've borrowed money not expecting that, and now you have to pay back money when the money is now worth more than it was when you borrowed it. In that particular case, what ended that was not any policy change. It was the combination effect of the discovery of the South African gold fields and the discovery of the cyanide process for extracting gold from low-grade ores, with the result that gold went from being a deflationary metal to an inflationary metal. Now, I should say by our standards, it was never either very deflationary or very inflationary, that a commodity standard like gold or silver is pretty stable compared to a fiat money. But still, you could do better. And you can certainly imagine circumstances pretty easily where the exchange rate between gold or the exchange rate between silver and other things you cared about changed in a random kind of way, and that's inconvenient if you're using this money. So my preferred system, though probably one that won't happen because it's more complicated, is what's referred to as a commodity bundle. So I issue my pieces of paper and I say, I don't actually redeem individual Friedman dollars. That's too much trouble. But if you bring in 1 million Friedman dollars, I will give you half a ton of grade A steel, plus 37 bushels of wheat, plus 1.5 ounces of gold, plus a list of commodities, such that, roughly speaking, they represent a price index, such as that the average exchange value of the bundle is not likely to change very much. And that would then give you a nice stable system. But that's really a detail. The basic idea is that what you want are competing private banks. Now, I've said nothing about the new technology, about Bitcoin and Ethereum and those things, which are very interesting institutions. We can talk about them if you like. But they didn't exist when I wrote that article, and I didn't expect them to exist. I was hoping that you would get an anonymous eCash, but I was thinking of a different mechanism for an anonymous eCash. But in any case, the point I'm making is only that rather than thinking about it as an issue of how should the government run the money supply, the right way of thinking about it is there any good reason why it should be done by government? I think the answer is no, that governments are poorly qualified because they have conflicts of interest in how they run the money supply, and that what the bank wants to do is to provide a stable money with predictable value. Now, if it turns out that issuing money is profitable, that is to say, if the cost of actually running the bank is less than the interest you get on the money you've gotten by putting out your paper, then you would expect banks to compete away that excess profit because they are all trying to take customers from each other. One way of doing that is for the money to be in the form of checking accounts, in which case you can pay interest on the checking accounts. Another way, probably less convenient, would be to have money that was defined in a way so that it gradually increased its value at some fixed schedule. There are various ways you could imagine doing that. But again, that's a somewhat fine point.